In the heart of a noisy, restless city, where no one has time to stop and look, sat a woman few people noticed. She wore the same faded brown shawl every day. Her slippers were torn. Her eyes quiet, unreadable. Each morning, she appeared near the bakery outside Metro Plaza, just as the shop shutters rolled open. She didn't speak. She didn't beg. She just sat. Sometimes she leaned against the wall. Sometimes she stared at the sidewalk cracks like they were trying to tell her something. The rush of life moved past her, people on phones, coffee in hand, rickshaws honking, children crying, but she never moved. Many assumed she had no one, no home, no past, just another forgotten soul among millions. A few people were kind, like Samir, the bakery delivery boy, who always left half a bun and a small paper cup of chai next to her, without expecting anything in return. He'd smile and say, "Pie for me, Alma," before running off to deliver hot naans and patties. She never asked, but she never refused, either. Just a small nod, a glance. That was all. Over time, people around began making up stories. "She's been here for years. I heard her kids abandoned her. Maybe she's mentally unstable. She smells. Why doesn't the city remove her?" Even the bakery owner grew restless. "She sits right outside my shop. Customers don't like it. She's bad for business." Once, he called the mall guards. They approached her awkwardly and told her to leave. She stood up slowly, brushed the dust off her shawl, and walked away without a word. But the next morning, she was back. Same spot, same silence. One day, it rained. Not the gentle kind. The skies opened in a sudden flood, and everyone ran for shelter. She didn't. She just sat there, eyes closed, face tilted slightly toward the sky. Her shawl soaked, her shoulders trembling, yet she didn't move. That day, a young woman offered her an umbrella. She refused, just smiled gently, and whispered something no one could hear. The woman walked away, shaking her head. Strange woman. A few days later, a shopkeeper caught her standing near his store entrance, trying to keep dry under his awning. He shouted at her, "Go away. You're not welcome here. This is private property." She turned her face to him, and for the first time, she spoke in a voice that was quiet but carried weight. "I'm not here to ask for anything, just some shade." But he didn't listen. "Get lost, Alma. Go beg somewhere else." She didn't argue. She simply moved away. And yet again, returned the next day, as if nothing happened. Then, one Friday afternoon, everything changed. A black government SUV pulled up across the street. Dark tinted windows, clean and polished. A rare sight in this part of town. From the passenger side stepped out two men. One wore a formal suit. The other had the demeanor of someone trained, alert, focused. The crowd turned. People paused in their conversations, their chai cups halfway to their lips. They crossed the street toward the old woman. And without a word, the man in the suit bent down and touched her feet. "Amy," he whispered. "Let's go, please. Forgive me." The second man held her arm gently, called her Bibi John, treated her like someone precious, not like a beggar, not like someone to be pitied. Then, the rear door opened, and out stepped a tall man in full police uniform. Not an ordinary officer. His chest bore medals. His shoulder had stars. His eyes carried authority, the kind you don't earn by accident. People gasped. Someone said softly, "That's a DIG. Senior police officer." Another whispered, "Is he here for her?" The officer didn't look around. He walked straight to her, kneeled, took her weathered hand in both of his. He kissed her forehead and said softly, "I told you not to do this anymore. You don't need to sit here, Amy. Not like this." The street fell into stunned silence. It didn't make sense. That old woman, the one people avoided, mocked, ignored, was the mother of a powerful man in uniform? The bakery owner's mouth hung open. Samir dropped the chai tray he was holding. The officer turned to his men. "Bring her things." She had only a cloth bag, a prayer mat, and a rusted tiffin box. That was all. He helped her into the SUV himself. But before she stepped inside, she turned and looked at the silent, stunned crowd. For the first time, she spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "You looked at me with pity. Some with disgust. Some with indifference. But not one of you asked who I was. You judged my silence. But you didn't know what I was listening to. Watching." Then she smiled. "The truth is, not everything broken is lost. And not every poor soul is truly alone." And with that, she got in. The SUV drove away. But the questions stayed behind. Who was she really? Why did she choose to sit on that sidewalk for so long? What was she trying to prove, or punish herself for? And why, with such a powerful son, did she live in silence? No one knew. At least, not yet. But whispers started. Some said she was once a teacher. Others claimed her husband was an officer, two who died in the line of duty. A few believed she carried guilt for something buried deep in the past. And the truth? The truth was far more complicated than anyone imagined. Her story hadn't ended with that car ride. It had only just begun. The SUV drove past the shops, turning down a quiet government street lined with tall trees and guarded gates. Inside, the officer sat beside his mother in silence. He didn't speak, and she didn't look at him. Only the hum of the engine filled the space between them. She held her cloth bag tightly. Her fingers ran slowly across the edge, as if counting memories, not threads. After a long pause, he spoke. "You could have called me." She didn't reply. "You didn't have to sit there, every day, in the dust, in front of strangers. That's not who you are." She finally turned to him. Her voice was calm. "Maybe not who I was. But maybe exactly who I became." The officer looked away. He'd spent years dealing with criminals, liars, and grieving families. He thought he had seen every kind of pain. But not this. Not his own mother, sitting outside a bakery like a stranger in her own city. At the safe house, a quiet bungalow used for protected persons, she was given warm clothes, a private room, fresh food. The officer left two female officers in charge of her comfort. He left orders: no media, no visitors. Nothing gets out. But by morning, it was too late. A photo had surfaced online. A blurred capture, the officer holding his mother's hand. The caption read, "Senior cop's secret mother found on street." It went viral in hours. Talk shows debated it. Some called it a beautiful act of love. Others speculated scandal. Was she abandoned? Is this shame or sacrifice? But none of them knew the truth. Samir, the bakery boy, couldn't stop thinking about her. He watched the news clip repeatedly. The same woman who once asked him how his exams went, now the mother of a high-ranking officer? He remembered something odd now. Once, long ago, when he had given her chai, she had quietly asked, "Samir, what would you do if you had to forgive someone you loved, someone who broke you?" He hadn't understood the question. He just shrugged. "Dunno, Amma. I guess I'd stay angry forever." She had smiled sadly and said, "That's the easy way." In the bungalow, she refused to rest. She wandered the small garden barefoot, gazing at flowers like they were children she once knew. Her son watched from the window. He knew she was restless. She always was, since that day. The day everything fell apart. It had been 16 years. 16 years since the court case that broke their family. 16 years since the uniform he now wore became a symbol of everything she had lost. He remembered the look on her face back then when he told her the truth about what had happened. Who had betrayed the family? Who had taken the bribe? Who had gone to jail? His father. A decorated officer once called a lion of the department. Caught in a corruption scandal that made headlines for months. His mother never forgave herself. Not because she was guilty, but because she had seen it coming and stayed silent. He had begged her to move on. She refused. So one day, without a word, she left the house and never returned. He searched for her for months, but she had erased herself from their world. And now, after all these years, she sat on the same street where his father once bought her flowers. The same bakery where she took him as a boy to get almond biscuits. He realized then this wasn't random. She had been punishing herself. Not because she was poor. Not because she was lost. But because she remembered everything and wanted to suffer where it hurt the most. That evening, he sat beside her in the garden. "Why did you never come back?" She looked at him, tired but still steady. "I needed to feel what he might have felt when the world turned away from him." "He chose that path," the officer said bitterly. "We both know he didn't just fall. He jumped." She didn't argue. She only said, "Then maybe I jumped with him." The officer lowered his eyes. "There's a case," he said quietly. "A cold case. 16 years old. Missing evidence. Tampered files. I think it was planted to destroy him." Her hands froze in her lap. "I buried that chapter," she whispered. He shook his head. "Maybe it buried us. But it's not over." He pulled out a file. Thick. Labeled in red, "Closed, Internal Affairs." "This was never an accident," he said. "I think someone wanted him gone. And you broken. And me obedient." Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, she reached forward, took the file in her shaking hands, then said one word. "Show me." She sat in the corner of the quiet study, the file open across her lap. The pages trembled under her fingers, not from the breeze, but from something colder. Memory. Regret. Fear. The officer stood nearby, watching her face, unsure if he had done the right thing by showing it. Inside the file, photographs, reports, witness statements. All from 16 years ago. Some names were blacked out. Some pages were missing altogether. But one report caught her eye. It was dated 3 weeks before her husband's arrest. A security footage analysis unverified, unsigned, that showed a brown envelope being passed to her husband by a man in a gray coat, near the back of a government building. She stared at the photo. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "That coat. That's not his usual contact." Her son nodded. "I know. And there's more. That footage was planted. The timestamp doesn't match the building's entry logs." He pulled out another sheet, a list of staff IDs from that day. Whoever gave him that envelope didn't sign in. There's no record. But one person was signed out early, someone you might remember. He pointed to a name, Shoaib Khan. Her hand froze. She closed her eyes slowly. Shoaib Khan. Her husband's closest colleague. Best man at their wedding. Uncle Shoaib to their son. She opened her eyes. "I told your father not to trust him so blindly. But he said." Shoaib was like a brother. He looked at her sharply. "Did he ever suspect him?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "Just before it all came down. Your father came home late one night. He didn't eat, didn't speak, just kept looking at his old service revolver." She looked away. "I didn't ask. I should've. But I didn't want to know. That's on me." Her son spoke quietly. "Whatever happened, you didn't betray him. He was betrayed from inside." She shook her head slowly. "No. It's not that simple." He leaned forward. "What do you mean?" She pulled a small envelope from her cloth bag. Old. Yellowing. Tied with string. Inside was a handwritten letter. Folded and worn. He wrote this the night before he turned himself in. The officer opened it carefully. Inside was a single line written in his father's unmistakable hand. "The truth has a price. And I've decided to pay it alone." He read it 3 times. Then looked up, his voice choked. He knew everything. She nodded. He could have exposed them. But they would have buried us all. You were 16. He said he'd rather wear the shame alone than put his son in danger. Her son clenched his fists. And so he died a criminal to the world, and a protector to us. She looked at him. Her eyes no longer old. They burned now with something new. Resolve. Then we clear his name. No matter what it takes. He nodded. I'll reopen the case. Quietly. I'll start inside the Internal Affairs Archive. But if Shoaib Khan's still alive, this won't be clean. She looked out the window. He's not just alive. He's thriving. I saw his face once, on a billboard near the defense housing gate. He runs a private security firm now. Hires retired officers. Politicians attend his fundraisers. The officer's jaw tightened. That ends now. But she placed a hand gently on his. No. You don't attack him. Not yet. You gather. You wait. You watch. He smiled faintly. You sound like you've been in intelligence. She leaned back. I lived in silence longer than some spies do. Watching the street was my training. That night, he drove her to a safer location, a discreet flat under a false name. He left 2 trusted officers at the door. Before he left, she called out softly. Beta. He turned. I'm sorry for hiding all these years. He walked back to her, touched her forehead gently. You were never hidden. You were surviving. And with that, he left. The city pulsed outside. But inside that small flat, the quiet felt sharp. She sat by the window, watching the street again. Old habits. But now her eyes weren't just watching. They were planning. Elsewhere, in a lavish office lined with leather and silence, Shoaib Khan swirled whiskey in a glass. A junior assistant entered, nervous. Sir, you might want to see this. He handed over a printed photo. It showed the officer her son helping the old woman into the SUV. The headline was small. Dig reunited with long-lost mother, a quiet story behind a quiet woman. Shoaib stared at it. His face hardened. So, she's back. He placed the photo down gently. But his hands shook. Shut it down, he said softly. The assistant blinked. Sir. Everything. Anyone from that year. If she speaks, everything collapses. The assistant nodded quickly and left. Shoaib looked out the glass wall of his office. The city lights blinked back. And for the first time in years, he felt cold. The rain returned to the city 2 days later. A heavy, moody drizzle that blurred the skyline and emptied the streets. Inside police headquarters, the fluorescent lights buzzed above empty desks and coffee-stained files. Most officers had gone home, but one remained. He sat alone in the basement records archive, the forgotten floor. His badge identified him as DIG Faris Amin. But tonight, he wasn't a high-ranking official. Tonight, he was a son. A son who had decided to rewrite the story the world had written for his father. The metal cabinet groaned as he pulled it open. Rows of dusty folders, marked with cryptic numbers and red tags. Internal disciplinary. 2009, he whispered. He began scanning. Most files were missing their supporting documents. Some were purposely misfiled. But one folder mislabeled and buried behind an empty box of toner caught his attention. It wasn't his father's name on it. It was Zara Amin, his mother. Inside, he found a short summary. Dismissed complaint. Civilian protest. Accusation withdrawn. Filed by Shoaib Khan. His breath caught. She had filed a complaint 16 years ago and it had never been investigated. A page was missing, torn cleanly. He leaned back, stunned. She had known something. She had tried to speak. And they silenced her before she could finish. He photocopied the remaining pages, tucked them into his coat, and left the building. Across the city, Samir sat in his small one-room apartment, re-watching the news clip on his phone. His friends had started teasing him. "You used to call her Amma, now she's VIP. You should have taken a selfie, maybe you'd go viral too." He didn't laugh. There was something bothering him. Something he remembered. Something from 2 years ago. He had seen a man visiting Amma just once. Dressed in a long gray coat. He hadn't spoken to her. He just stood at a distance. Watched her. Then left. Samir remembered his face clearly. Not because he looked important, but because he looked scared. He rummaged through an old envelope full of pictures. Samir loved street photography, sometimes capturing moments of people on the sidewalk. And there it was. A photo. Unfocused. Slightly tilted. But clear enough. The man in the gray coat, standing across the street from the bakery, staring directly at Amma. Samir didn't know who he was. But something about the man's eyes made him uneasy. They weren't kind. They were calculating. He decided to go to the police station and ask for DIG Ferris. Meanwhile, Shoaib sat in a dark conference room with 3 men. 2 were former intelligence officers. 1 was a fixer, the kind of man who knew how to make problems disappear. "She's alive. She's connected again. And worse, she's talking to him," Shoaib said coldly. One of the men asked, "Does she still have the ledger?" "No," Shoaib replied. "If she did, I'd be ruined already. But she might remember names, codes, things she wasn't meant to hear." The fixer leaned forward. "You want her gone?" Shoaib looked away. "I want her to forget. I want her to disappear, like before." Quietly, without questions. The room went silent. Then Shoaib added, "And if Ferris gets in the way, handle him too." Back at the safe flat, Zara sat in silence. She held the photocopied file Ferris had left for her earlier. Her name on an official complaint. She'd forgotten about that day. But as she traced her fingers across the faded ink, it came back. The night she followed her husband to the parking garage. The argument she overheard. Shoaib's voice low and threatening. "You back out now, and your whole family burns." She had gone straight to headquarters and filed the report. She didn't mention names. She didn't have proof. Just fear. And within hours, Shoaib had found her. Smiling, charming, terrifying. "You don't want to be responsible for your husband's death," he had said softly. She never filed again. She never spoke again. Until now. She looked out the window, rain streaking the glass. And for the first time, she let herself feel something she had buried for 16 years. Fury. At the station, Ferris was reviewing surveillance footage when Samir arrived, panting. "Sir, I need to show you something." He pulled out the photograph, the man in the gray coat. Ferris stared. His eyes narrowed. Samir explained quickly. "I took this maybe 2 years ago. I didn't know who he was. But he was staring at your mother. And she looked tense. Like she felt it." Ferris leaned forward. "Can you come with me? Right now?" Samir nodded. They drove to the flat in silence. But when they arrived, the security guard was unconscious. The front door was wide open. And Zara was gone. The silence was heavy. The kind that feels loud in your bones. Ferris stepped into the flat, his eyes scanning every inch. The guard at the door, unconscious, but breathing. No blood. No struggle. Just a sharp hit to the temple, clean and professional. Inside, nothing was stolen. But her cloth bag was gone. So was the letter. And the complaint file. He walked into the small bedroom. The window was open, rain trailing down the sill. He stood there, frozen. Samir hovered at the door. "Sir, where could she have gone?" Ferris didn't answer. His mind raced. She wouldn't run. Not after all this time. Not unless she had to. He turned to Samir. Forget the photo you took. Have someone run facial recognition. That man matters. I want a name. A location. Anything. Samir nodded, already dialing someone he knew from a freelance media group. Ferris checked the CCTV camera feed from the street. Nothing. Footage was wiped. Not a mistake. A message. In a black van, parked behind a construction site near the city's edge, Zara sat with her hands bound in front of her. Not tight. Not painful. But enough to keep her still. The man across from her, tall, wearing that same gray coat, watched her silently. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Finally, he sighed. You should have stayed invisible, Bibi. She tilted her head. You should have stayed small, he added. This city is full of ghosts. You were lucky to become one. But your son. He paused. He wants to make you a symbol. A story. You'll bring ruin on both of you. She smiled slowly. You remember what my husband used to say? She whispered. He looked annoyed. No. She leaned forward, voice calm. He said, the only thing more dangerous than truth is a mother holding it in her hands. His jaw twitched. I'm not afraid of you. She nodded. You should be. At headquarters, Ferris stood in front of a whiteboard, marking out connections. The photo from Samir finally returned a hit. Rafi Sattar, former military intelligence officer, presumed dead in 2012. No funeral. No record. Just disappeared. Until now. That meant this wasn't just a cover-up. It was a cleanup. And Zara was in the middle. A junior officer rushed in, holding a file. Sir. We found something odd. 16 years ago, the audit on your father's financials. There's a mismatch. His bank account was frozen before his arrest. Ferris snatched the paper. He scanned it. Frozen on Shoaib Khan's order. Which meant Shoaib had moved before the corruption charges. As if he knew what was coming. Ferris whispered to himself. You set the fire, then called the fire brigade. At the van, Zara looked up calmly as Rafi opened the door. He dragged her out, but not roughly. She was placed into a concrete basement beneath an old farmhouse, remote, quiet, forgotten by most. Inside, Shoaib waited. He looked older than she remembered. But the cruelty, that smooth, rehearsed cruelty, had aged like wine. She was placed in a chair. He sat across from her, smiling like this was a tea party. Zara. Still strong. Still stubborn. She didn't reply. He leaned forward. Tell your son to stop. Walk away. You'll both live longer. She chuckled. You really don't know him, do you? Shoaib's smile faded. You think this ends with your family's honor restored? He stood. Even if you prove I framed your husband, you think anyone will care? Do you know how many people are under my protection? Ministers, generals, judges. Your son's badge can't survive this storm. She leaned back slowly. Then you should be worried. Shoaib raised a brow. Because he's not in this storm, she said. He is the storm. Back at headquarters, Ferris stood before a wall of documents, his hand running across lines of red string, names, photos. He had built the timeline. The false footage. The complaint suppressed. The sudden wealth Shoaib acquired after the arrest. The death of the original investigating officer ruled a heart attack. And the missing ledger. A secret document his father had supposedly hidden, full of names and bribes, backdoor deals, protected informants. Ferris whispered. That's what they're afraid of. His phone rang. It was Samir. Sir. I traced the van that took her. From a drone camera, some protest footage near Gulzar Chowk. It stopped at a checkpoint near Chukri Road. Ferris narrowed his eyes. That leads to the old Farouk farmhouse. He was already grabbing his keys. Gear up. No sirens. No backup. Just us. Sir, I'm not trained. Ferris cut him off. You were the only one who saw what others missed. That makes you part of this now. They drove through the rain, cutting through muddy backroads and fields soaked from weeks of drizzle. Ahead, the farmhouse loomed. Dark. Silent. Ferris parked. Samir swallowed hard. What's the plan? Ferris loaded his pistol. Truth. In the basement, Shoaib stared at Zara. You're lucky I respected your husband. Otherwise, I'd have ended you already. She met his gaze. You ended him the day you turned on him. Not with a bullet. With betrayal. He approached her slowly, something cold and sharp now in his eyes. You think Ferris is going to walk in here and save you? He laughed bitterly. This is real life. He'll disappear like his father did. Suddenly footsteps. The basement door slammed open, and Ferris walked in, pistol raised. His eyes locked on Shoaib. His voice didn't shake. Step away from her. Ferris stepped into the basement like a man walking into fire, steady, unblinking. The rain from outside still clung to his shoulders, glistening on his collar. He held the pistol straight at Shoaib Khan's chest. Shoaib didn't move. Didn't flinch. He smiled. Ferris. Always so dramatic. Like your father. He stepped slowly to the side, hands open, calm. But don't point that thing at me, Beta. You don't understand what you've walked into. Ferris didn't lower the gun. I understand everything now. Behind him, Samir appeared at the doorway, holding an iron rod he'd found upstairs, breath shaking, but eyes determined. Zara looked up at her son. His jaw was tight. His eyes burning. You okay, Amy? She nodded faintly. Yes. But you're late. A faint smile flickered on Ferris's face. He turned back to Shoaib. You killed my father's reputation. You froze his accounts. You blackmailed my mother. And you thought you could erase them both. Shoaib chuckled softly. And yet here I am, uncharged. Unbroken. With more power than any badge you'll ever wear. Ferris stepped closer. You're afraid of something, though. Still. After all this time. Shoaib's smile faded. Ferris reached into his coat pocket, not with the hand holding the pistol, but the other. He pulled out a small USB drive. This is your storm, Ferris said quietly. And it's already started. Shoaib's eyes narrowed. What is that? Ferris glanced toward his mother. She didn't forget. She remembered where the ledger was. Zara met Shoaib's stare, now head high, eyes steady. You always thought my husband had it. You searched his locker, his desk, our home. But he never kept it. He left it with someone you never noticed. Shoaib's voice cracked. Who? Zara smiled faintly. His student. A boy he trusted like a son. Who grew up to become a small-time photographer. Someone invisible to men like you. Shoaib's eyes widened. He turned slowly toward Samir. Samir's grip on the iron rod tightened. He gave it to me when I was 10, Samir said, his voice trembling but firm. Inside a toy camera. I thought it was junk. I kept it in a box under my bed for years. Until Alma called me Beta one day and I started looking differently at the world. Ferris inserted the USB into a small portable reader and turned it toward Shoaib. It was all there. Names. Accounts. Payments. Dates. Proof of every bribe. Every cover-up. Every officer, politician, and judge that Shoaib had bought. Shoaib lunged forward. But Ferris stepped to the side and slammed him hard into the wall. Shoaib gasped, the wind knocked out of him. Samir rushed to Zara and began untying her hands. Ferris pressed the barrel of the pistol to Shoaib's neck. It's over. But Shoaib laughed, wheezing, blood on his lip. You think this makes you a hero? You'll die before this hits court. You'll disappear. They'll bury this drive and you with it. Ferris pulled out his phone. I already sent copies to the press. To 3 human rights lawyers. To internal intelligence. And to the Prime Minister's office. Shoaib froze. Ferris leaned in close. You wanted silence. You're going to drown in noise. 30 minutes later, the farmhouse was surrounded. Police cars. Armored vans. Federal media. Shoaib was escorted out in handcuffs, his head low, his empire cracking. Samir sat on the stairs outside, holding the toy camera in his hands, the same one that had held the key to everything. Zara sat beside Ferris in the back of the ambulance, wrapped in a warm shawl, sipping tea. You found me, she said. I never stopped looking, he replied. She looked at him. Your father would have been proud. He smiled faintly. I think he already was. She reached for his hand. Now what? Ferris looked out the window, where the press was already swarming. Now, he said, we clear every name they tried to stain. She nodded, then whispered, not every name. He turned to her. There's still one truth left, she said. I never told you everything about your father. His breath caught. What do you mean? She looked away. Because not all betrayals come from enemies. The ambulance doors clicked shut as they drove away from the farmhouse. Blue and red lights reflected in the rearview mirror. Ferris sat beside his mother, her words echoing in his mind. Not all betrayals come from enemies. Ferris turned to her slowly. What do you mean, Amy? Are you saying he betrayed us too? She stared out the window. The rain had stopped. But something inside her hadn't. Your father, she said softly, was a good man, brave, honest. But he was also afraid. Ferris frowned. Afraid of what? Zara hesitated, then whispered, of you. Of what would happen if you knew the truth. He froze. Zara pulled a folded paper from inside her sleeve. Her hands trembled as she gave it to him. Ferris unfolded it slowly. It was an old, yellowed photograph. 3 men stood in a room. His father, Shoaib Khan, and a third man Ferris didn't recognize. All smiling. All in uniform. Ferris's throat tightened. What is this? Zara spoke carefully. Your father wasn't just Shoaib's enemy. He was his friend. Once. Ferris felt the ground shift beneath him. In the early years, before the corruption, before Shoaib became what he is now, they worked together. The third man, in that photo, Brigadier Haroon, he was their mentor. The man who trained them, protected them. Ferris looked closer at the photo. The man had sharp eyes, a gentle smile, and a presence of power. They were like brothers, Zara said. Until the mission in Balochistan. Ferris looked up, confused. Mission. Zara nodded slowly. Something happened out there. Something no one ever talked about again. But when your father returned, he wasn't the same. She paused, her voice cracking. He started keeping secrets. He distanced himself from Shoaib, from Haroon, from the department. That's when the files went missing. When the ledger first appeared. Ferris tried to make sense of it all. So you're saying Abba wasn't innocent? Zara gripped his hand. No. I'm saying he saw things. Things he couldn't live with. And instead of staying silent, he tried to fight them. Ferris stared down at the photo again. But if they were brothers, why did Shoaib try to destroy him? Zara's voice dropped to a whisper. Because your father took something from him. Ferris's heart pounded. What? She looked into his eyes. A file. A secret. Something not even I was allowed to see. He called it the list of ghosts. Ferris froze. Ghosts. A code name? A network. He spoke slowly, testing the words. You think it's still out there? Zara nodded. If Shoaib was terrified even after all these years, then yes. It's still somewhere. And if we find it, this story doesn't end with him. Ferris leaned back in the seat, stunned. It wasn't over. It was never just about Shoaib. Samir, sitting in the front of the ambulance, looked over his shoulder. So what do we do now? Ferris stared at the photo. The third man, Brigadier Haroon. "I think," Ferris said, "it's time we visit a man who trained both a hero and a monster." The house was quiet now. Months had passed since the night Shoaib Khan's empire collapsed. Since a woman once mistaken for a beggar walked free with her head held high. Since Ferris turned from officer to justice seeker. The media called it the reckoning from within. Headlines praised Ferris as the man who brought down corruption not with violence, but with truth. Samir returned to his quiet life, though not unnoticed. A small studio opened under his name, where young children from the slums learned photography for free. On the walls hung a toy camera, and next to it, a plaque that read, "Some pictures don't just capture moments. They expose monsters." Zara never went back to hiding. She walked with dignity now. She smiled more, cried less. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the curtains, she placed a fresh cup of chai beside her son, who sat by the window reading case files. "You still haven't found it?" she asked softly. Ferris looked up and smiled. "No, but I will. The list of ghosts is out there. I can feel it." She touched his shoulder gently. "Maybe the truth doesn't always need to be found in files," she whispered. "Sometimes, the way we live is the loudest truth of all." He nodded, letting her words settle in his heart. As she walked away, Ferris turned the photo over in his hand again, the one with his father, Shoaib, and Brigadier Haroon. A note scribbled on the back caught his eye. It read, "When the last name is read, the first name rises again." He looked out at the city skyline, glowing in the soft morning haze. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is rebuilding everything they tried to destroy. With honor, with love, and with truth.